Well, good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here. I really love the testimony time that you guys have. I think that is just so great to hear what God's doing in the lives of the people who are around you, and just as Brian said, knowing that you're not alone in what is going on in life. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things that the church is meant to be, is a place where you can know, hey, it's not just me. I'm doing this with other people. And so thank you for having that time here and just being able to have this opportunity to be here with you today and serving in this capacity. So I just wanted to give you guys I guess fits into this a little bit is testimony of myself and just kind of where I am and where God's led me. And so as Brian said, I serve at Parkside Church. My official title actually is Pastoral Apprentice, which is kind of a weird title, but it's a training session for me in ministry to be able to take on a different role in pastoring than as currently what I'm doing. My wife Nicole and I have been married for 15 years. We have 4 kids, and in fact, I can't remember all their names all the time, so I had to get them written down on my arm so I could we which one is which, and it helps me a lot to do those kinds of things. So, there we go. But one of the things for me is I grew up in a home that went to church, but it wasn't a home that took Jesus back home afterwards. So I grew up a lot knowing about Jesus, knowing stories of him, but never really having the relationship that comes from having Jesus in your life. Church was just something that we attended, but it didn't shape our lives. And I can tell that that's something that is definitely true for all of you. It's shaping you, which is amazing. And I became a Christian at a Foursquare camp when I was 13. And when I was 19, I graduated high school and went to Bible college at PLBC, and that's where I first felt God calling me to be a pastor. But it became very evident to me that I needed to grow up quite a bit before that was going to happen. So 20 years hiatus of doing anything ministry-wise, and about 5 years ago, God brought that call back and said, hey, I want you to consider what it looks like to follow me into being a pastor. And so I took the leap. Quit my job a few years ago, started this apprenticeship, and this is where God has led me so far. But over the time that I have been in ministry in official capacity, I've looked back and I can clearly see that God does this all the time. He reveals what it is that he is wanting to do in our lives, and then he requires a response from us. And over time, my response, imperfect as it was, became a yes. I will follow you. As I said, that's not just my story. That, in fact, is the story that we see continuously. God revealing himself and people responding. Interestingly enough, my story is not unique, as I said. God revealing himself to you all. Throughout the Bible, we see it. And that's what we're going to look at today together, is the revelation that God gives, and then the responses that we can offer him back. 2 possible responses. And our text that we're going to look at today comes from the Gospel of Matthew. It's chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. It's the story of the Magi. And in this story, we'll see how God's revelation is responded to by the people who encountered it. Before we get to the text, I just want to ask a question and share a little bit of church history with you guys. So, what comes to mind when I say the 12 days of Christmas? Anybody? Song. Yeah, song. Right? Everybody thinks of the song that gets a little bit more crazy and chaotic as it goes along. But historically, and in fact even in some church traditions today, 12 days of Christmas are actually recognized and celebrated. And they mark the time between the birth of Jesus and the visit of the Magi. I don't know if you know that. The countdown that begins on December 26th and ends on January 6th is known as Epiphany, which means revelation. And the season of remembrance of this 12 days, either celebrated in song or in some traditions with a feast, reminds us that Christmas didn't end with Jesus' birth. It actually began a countdown to the revelation of what his birth means. And so our text is the story of the Magi. We see that how God is revealed and how people respond. Just like Christmas announced the good news, we all remember that. The angels told the shepherds the Messiah has been born, Savior, the promised one. Epiphany reveals something more. It reveals that Jesus is the Savior and Messiah for the whole world, which is really good news for us. Because otherwise, a group of men from modern-day Iran would not have traveled for months just to find him. So let's read our text today. And as we do, just pay attention to how different people responded to that same revelation. So Matthew 2, 1-12 says, After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem and asked, Where is the one who has been born, the King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem, in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so I too can go and worship him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. I don't know about you, but personally when I read the Bible, I find myself in the story, in the shoes of the people who are in it. And when I do that, I often realize that I'm more in the villain's shoes than the hero's. Often not. People who are making, at best, immature decisions, and sometimes the outright rebellious ones. I really hope that I'm not the only one who feels that way. It's gonna be really awkward for me otherwise. But I wanted today to take a closer look at the two responses that we see in this story and to see where we can find ourselves in them. So from the text, two responses stand out clearly. First, there's Herod's response. Along with all Jerusalem, verse 3 tells us that they were disturbed by what the star revealed. The second response is that of the Magi. After a long journey, verse 10 and 11 tells us that they found Jesus and they responded with joy. And they bowed down and worshiped him. One revelation, two responses. As I said earlier, revelation always requires a response. So what is it about the star and what it revealed that disturbed Herod and Jerusalem? Well, the answer is fear. Herod felt threatened by what Jesus' arrival meant for him and his family. A new king on the scene meant that his kingdom and his dynasty could be displaced. Today, we don't use words like dynasty and kingdom a lot, but we do use words like legacy. We don't talk about building our kingdoms per se, but we do talk about making a name for ourselves. And when those things become our focus, we can find ourselves in this story, as I said, sometimes not in the way that we'd hope. We can respond with fear, resistance, and a desire for control. That's not very comfortable, because it's true. And the response of Herod and the leaders who would later crucify Jesus shows us something very sobering. It shows us that we can be right in the middle of God's good news story, and it can be bad news for us, because we're afraid of what we might lose. But here's the good news. Because with Jesus, there's always good news. And in fact, the church that I grew up in, my pastor would always say, if it's not good news, it's not the gospel. And I've always remembered that. As I said, with Jesus, it's always good news, because we don't need to fear what Jesus is bringing into our lives. Because what he brings, wow, it is so good. It is so, so good. Jesus brings hope for all mankind. Jesus brings a kingdom of peace. Jesus is the cause for great joy, as the Magi testified. And Jesus' coming is motivated by love. And I know that's what you guys learned through the Advent season. And the revelation of Jesus often draws a line in the sand, and it requires us to choose whose kingdom we'll build and whose name we'll make great. And we can respond like Herod, with fear and resistance and control, or we can respond like the Magi, with wonder, which leads to joy and worship. And honestly, even from the testimonies that were here this morning, all those elements that Jesus brings, the hope, peace, joy, love, all those things they're evident. They're evident in your lives. They're evident in my life. And in light of those things, the response of, yes, Lord, and reorienting our lives the way that the Magi did, it just makes sense. And for me, responding like the Magi meant quitting my job in my 40s, becoming a pastoral apprentice, and learning very quickly that ministry looks much easier on that side of the pulpit. But saying is, it didn't remove the fear that I had, but Jesus became greater in my life as a result of it. And fear lost its grip on me. And that promise is true for you as well. I don't know all of your church's history, but from what I do know, I can tell this community regularly responds like the Magi did. I was talking to someone and they said, you guys have been here 14, 15 years. That's incredible. That is commitment. That is honestly to be admired. Because being here in this community, even knowing there's Cobb's bread in the room over there that's being given out, you guys you're carrying hope to this community. You're bringing that peace that surpasses understanding. You're bringing joy that gives strength. And you guys are giving love that never fails. So my encouragement to you today is to just simply ask Jesus, what would it look like for you personally to respond the way that the Magi did in reorienting their lives? The way that your church has in its commitment. It might be a big step, like mine was, for me, quite a big step. It might be even just a first step in saying, okay, I'm going to let this thing go. I'm going to allow you, Lord, to have this part. It might be releasing something that you've been holding on to. But from the testimonies that are here earlier, you're already doing it. And so I just encourage you to continue. Encourage you to continue to say, yes, Lord. Encourage you to continue to say, here I am, send me, as Isaiah said. And I just want to remind you that whatever he asks of you, it'll be good news. It'll be good news for you, because that's who Jesus is. He's the giver of good news.